Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final minutes of the first ever Jewish Ethics Project weekend. And you'll forgive me, but there are some thank yous that need to be said. So first of all, the most obvious of the thank yous is to Rav Mosheh Lichtenstein, who's thrilled and informed us over the last couple of days. He's spoken to audiences of young 12, 13-year-olds. He's spoken to audiences as old as we are here together, and has really really managed to connect with all those audiences and made really complex ideas seem so simple. You know, why didn't I think of that? Well, I didn't think of it because I'm not Rav Lichtenstein. So thank you very much for spending your time with us over the last couple of days. Can I also thank Dayan Zobin, who has helped us host the event largely at Ner Yisrael, and without your enthusiasm for the event, we wouldn't have been able to do it under such comfortable and appropriate circumstances. Just to check, I can be heard? Yes. Okay, fine. No, I can't be heard. I can be heard now? It's on, okay. This is as good as it gets, I'm afraid. Okay. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the Jewish Ethics Project, in particular tonight to Paddy and Elkan Adler, who put on this particular event, and Elkan has been dealing with the minutiae of the weekend, negotiating, dealing with... Did he drive you mad? And speaking delicately with Rav Lichtenstein over the last few months. I'd also like to thank Donald and Diana Franklin. We have to congratulate Donald, who's not only a trustee of the Jewish Ethics Project, but he's now the grandfather of a Jacobovich Prize-winning writer. Whilst we're there, I should congratulate Mr. Gasparovich, who won the senior competition. All those essays will be published in the near future, subject to negotiations with the authors, I guess, and people will be able to look at the incredibly high standard that young people are hitting these days. I should also mention Brian Berenblatt and Feller. I should mention Daniel Greenberg, who are also on the JEP committee, who've been very, very important in getting to this particular moment in time. So, we've had the benefit over the last couple of days of Rav Lichtenstein shining an ethical light in areas that we're not really used to approaching in an ethical manner, and it certainly hasn't been the traditional way in which we express our Jewish identity. And he's been showing us that part of our Jewish identity is to look at certain areas and try and work out what is a virtuous Jewish response in those areas. And the more he spoke, very much resonates with many of the things that we've heard from Dayan Zobin. So it's only natural that we should bring them together and see if there's any difference in their approach, or maybe harmony will reign. But I'm going to start off by asking Rav Lichtenstein the following question. So, you were talking about how we have to use our Jewish resources to try and resolve certain ethical questions, and you talked even to the extent that the government of the State of Israel should be held to account against those resources, against those values. We live in a world now that Israel is going to have to make alliances around the world with some very unsavory customers, very unsavory countries, very unsavory leaders. Would you extend the need to apply Jewish values to Israeli foreign policy and who we deal with and how we deal with them? We may not like the leaders of Russia so much, but they are important players. So how do we balance the ethical sensitivity that we have with that concern that they don't really represent what we hold dear?
First, excuse me. First of all, I want to extend my thanks to everybody here, all those who were mentioned, and to the entire community. I really felt a warm embrace, and it's been wonderful to come back. And it's quite a few years I wasn't here, to come back and reconnect. And after 10 minutes in this courtyard, I felt right at home, and I really appreciate the hospitality and more the sense of commonality, that we're partners together. Chazal say, who's a Yerushalmi, who's a Jerusalemite? Echad hanolad ba, echad hametzapeh lirota. He was born in Yerushalayim, or he aspires to be there. Of course, in the time of the Gemara, aspiration was enough because it was very difficult to implement. Now, maybe aspiration requires a bit more involvement and engagement. But even people living here, I think, can be engaged and aspire to be Yerushalmi, meaning they concern themselves with issues facing Eretz Yisrael. And I really feel that we are one community, and we deal with the same issues, and we partner the same way. In the past 2.5 years have even emphasized that much more. So I really feel at home here, and really thank you, and toda rabba. To your question, the dilemma has been with Israel, I think, the past 80 years. It hasn't been, it's not something recent. In the 1950s and 60s, to also, and later on, there were many such dilemmas as well. I think the answer is, in theory, absolutely. In practice, though, it's very different. And I'll try to explain. I think most of us, the average person, in his life, a certain margin of error or a security margin that he has for himself. States have a much smaller margin of error. They have almost no shoulders on their roads. They have, the margin of error is much, much less. I'll take an example. There's a discussion in Gemara. Can a person steal or use someone else's money to save his life? Now, the answer is obviously yes. And the Gemara's discussion really, according to most opinions at least, do I owe compensation? But right, it's clear that if my neighbor's a life-saving drug, and he has enough supply and I need it, right? It's clear to all of us that pikuach nefesh, to save a life, I can break into his house and take the drug. Or if someone in my house is having a heart attack at 2 a.m., and the only car available is the neighbor's car, I can get in and take it to save the person's life. However, these scenarios are very rare in human life. Human life, almost always, you don't have to, you don't reach the circumstances. In the life of a nation, they're quite often. There was an American Christian theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr. He wrote a book called Moral Man, Immoral Society. And the thesis was that man, the individual, has to be moral, but the nation does not have to be moral. It should use force and power and so on. Now, I think in theory, of course, that such a caption is incorrect. But in practice, you often have to do that. And then the question now becomes, if to save your life you would have to have an alliance with an unsavory neighbor, it would be a whole different story than if it's only just to cooperate and have neighborly relations. And here Israel is often confronted with the question, is this really just diplomacy, or the survival of the nation depends, or the security of the nation depends upon it? And that changes the equation. I do believe that usually, I would say almost always, good morality is also good diplomacy and good policy. At the end of the day, these things, they always boomerang. They always come back to haunt you, and you always pay the price. And I think the Soviet Union is a good example. There's so many prices to be paid. Therefore, good morality almost always translates into solid policy as well. But should Israel have sold, weapons to all kinds of Central American dictatorships in the 1980s? I think the calculation is very different when you're a state. That doesn't mean that everything goes. I think certain nations that we sell their weapons to should. I don't think it's a good idea. But I think you'd have to assess it very, very differently. And I'll say a final point. I don't usually subscribe to the idea that people in power know much more, and therefore we can't second guess because they have all the knowledge and we know nothing. Now, they do have much more knowledge than we do. Normally, it doesn't make such a big difference because the big picture issues are obvious to everybody. But nevertheless, certain issues, you always have to take into account also at least the possibility that there are hidden things that you are unaware of and they may be aware of.
Thank you. Just to give you an idea, I'm going to ask a couple of questions at a time, and if you want to intervene and ask on that topic or close to that topic, then I'll give an opportunity for people to ask their questions. So I'm going to bring that question and frame it in a much more parochial sense by looking at how we as a Jewish community in the United Kingdom should bring Jewish values to bear in our interaction with the society in which we live. For example, we've recently watched a debate which ended up failing on assisted dying. Now, clearly there are Jewish ethical ideas that we may wish to present, but largely the way we handle it as a Jewish community is, well, within our bubble we know what the right thing to do is, but we'll let them get on with it. Is that really what the Torah is demanding from us, to let them get on with it and keep our ethics to ourselves? You might think as well there's going to be a capital punishment debate at some point in the next 3 or 4 years. How as Jews do we approach that? And finally, obviously, the abortion debate, depending on future elections, might once again become current. Do we enter the fray as Jews, or do we say, hey, look, we know what's right for us, you get on with it? So, Brian Zobin.
Thank you, Rabbi Pollack and Rav Mosheh. Before anything else, to say what an honor and privilege it is to sit here on the same platform with you, and for you to have so graced us with your presence over the Shabbat. As you said, Rabbi Pollack, it is in a sense a more parochial question, definitely easier to answer than the sweeping sorts of national decisions that Israel has to make. I think there's a number of points to mention over here. The first is we ultimately have a Jewish mission and a sense of responsibility for all our fellow human beings on this wonderful earth of ours, and an idealistic vision, sense that they can all be fellow travellers in living a moral, spiritual, transcendent life and recognition of Hashem. There's so many quotes one could give, but the Rambam in the end of his section on Zoroim, after having spoken about the privileged responsibility of the Kohanim and the Leviim, concludes famously in Hilchos Shmita V'Yovel, concludes the whole section by saying, V'lo shevet Levi bilvad. It's not just Shevet Levi that can be Levites, that can have this sort of elevated life of service of God. And we would expect him to carry on maybe by saying a chiddush that any Jew can do so. But he carries on and says, Kol Boy Olam. Anyone who is in the world, any human being can ultimately serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in an elevated manner. And if they are willing to dedicate their life to the pursuit of transcendence and spirituality in a manner somewhat akin to that of Bnei Levi, that of the Levites and the Kohanim, then they can do so. So there clearly is a sense that any human can and should aspire to the heights of morality and the like. And we have a Jewish responsibility towards that. The Rambam in Hilchos Melachim says that we have a responsibility of kindness and care towards our fellow human beings. He says we have a responsibility, very beautiful poetic language of the Rambam, where he says we have a responsibility to engage in chesed, in kindness, in care, in Bikur Cholim, in visiting the sick, and in healing those who are unwell, in burying the dead, and the like. And the Rambam says that the reason to do so is because of Darkei Sholem, which is often mistranslated as sort of ways of peace, of kind of to avoid anti-Semitism and the like. But if we take the Rambam on face value, and he deserves to be taken on face value, Darkei Shalom means because of ways of peace. There's a shleimus, there's a sense of shared destiny that we all have as human beings. And indeed, the Rambam carries on by bringing Pesukim to demonstrate that. This isn't Mishum Eva, just that, to avoid hatred, we have to sort of also care for others. He says, Racham Kol Masov, there we live in a world in which there's a responsibility, a Jewish responsibility to all of humanity. So I think we have a duty of care to all humanity, and that should surely include a duty of care to a moral duty of care also, to the best of our ability, try and inspire society to adopt moral and spiritual values within, and indeed that's our responsibility and expectation within a democracy, a liberal democracy, to voice our opinion and to try and impact broader society. Now, in some of the examples you gave, and as you were speaking, I sort of noted the examples you gave, in some of them we also have a selfish interest to so do. It is clear that a society in which inappropriate application of assisted dying or the like, and there are boundaries in halachah in which medical treatment may come to an end, but certainly if there's a shift and a loss of the sense of sanctity of life within broader society, then on a practical level that will impact us in terms of funding for healthcare and end-of-life treatment and the like, and also on a sort of trickle-down effect, it will begin impacting on our community sense of values. So there's a selfish reason why we should engage in this national discourse and have responsibility to do so. But then there's a more altruistic reason to do that, which is we have a responsibility for the morality of society. We have lived in a world in which there's a mislabeled Judeo-Christian ethic that dominates. I'm not going to talk about what's wrong in that labeling, but it is correct to say that that there's an unraveling going on at the moment of many of the basic values that were at the core of a sort of agreed upon ethical system, and many of these in certain ways align with Jewish values, and there will be a price to be paid if we lose them, both selfishly and in terms of our responsibility towards broader society. I think there are a number of challenges though, and with this I'll conclude. The first is we often don't find ourselves neatly aligning with either of the stated positions. So, for example, when America went through its debates around abortion, and often there were two sides, right of self-determination, right for life and so on, often the Christian right getting very involved in lobbying on one side and the other, I don't think it was easy necessarily for Jews to align simply with either stance. We don't align automatically with some of the evangelical Christian perspectives of Catholic positions on this, nor do we align with the sort of idea that abortion is just a choice that can be made in an insignificant way. Halachah often has a more nuanced perspective, and it's difficult to ally itself with either stance. And certainly here in the UK and even America with its larger numbers, ultimately we're a small community, and it's challenging to sometimes to fit in with either point of view. So I think we do have a responsibility to take part in the national debate. We have a responsibility to invest resources in this. The Rambam, when he talks about Gemilas Zobin and the like, is talking about investing resources. He's there in Hilchas Zoroim and in Hilchas Melachim. There is an investment of resources, but it is challenging sometimes to do so as a small community. I just want to add one comment to Rav Lichtenstein's comments. And this is, even on the UK level, we sometimes need to think who our fellow travellers are. And you asked the question of Lichtenstein, diplomacy that Israel engages in with leaders who are problematic. Here in the UK, I think we face these challenges where unfortunately, sometimes some of the strongest voices emerging in the support of the Jewish community are also voices who are using anti-Semitism to express sometimes xenophobic views, Islamophobic views and the like. And I think we need to choose with care who our fellow travellers are, even here within the UK. And I firmly believe, as Rav Lichtenstein said, that if we make the immoral choices, this will not work well for our community either. We can be short-sighted and in the short term say there's a certain political agitator or populist who's voicing simplistic analysis of very real problems that need to be addressed. I'm not trying to be wishy-washy about really serious issues that need to be addressed around the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and the like, but sometimes there are populists using this to come up with simplistic solutions, and we may think that these present allies, useful allies for our communities, and in my view they absolutely do not. These are dangerous bedfellows. They will betray us address without any hesitation, and for us to find ourselves on the wrong side, on the immoral side of this equation, even on a pragmatic level. I cannot see any way in which that can play out in a positive way. I do think we have to remain committed, even within our more parochial setting of UK Anglo Jewry, to a committed
Thank you very much. So we're discussing fellow travellers and picking our fellow travellers. Your grandfather was famously allergic to interfaith discussion. Is it possible that these days we need to review that, because we find those potential fellow travellers have lined up against us? The Christian churches in particular are now, unlike in his lifetime where they were natural allies of the Jewish people and of Israel, maybe we do need to start working with them on an interfaith basis to try and rebuild those old alliances.
I think you raised two different questions in a sense: interfaith and political support, Christian political support. He was allergic to both. That's true. And the interfaith I'll address in a moment, but he also was very wary of all these Christians that Netanyahu was, or whoever it was at the time, but all these Chevet that Netanyahu is chasing, he was very wary of them, because he saw a theological prism, and what he realized was that these Christians, they support us now, but that's only because theologically they see us as the first step to a process which they aspire to, and we obviously don't. And because of that, basically, they saw supporting the state of Israel as allowing them to bring along their eschatological vision, which we can subscribe to. He was very wary of that. But I'll start with the interfaith. I do believe that his basic thesis, I totally accept and identify with. His basic thesis was that the man-God interaction is a relationship. That you believe in God and His omnipotence, etc., but you mainly interact with Him as a relationship. And relationships demand intimacy. And therefore, interfaith dialogue assumes that it's all the same. It's all one and the same. There's a common denominator, and then we have each person has idiosyncratic expression. But there's a common denominator, and that's what really matters. And he saw faith as a gesture of personal commitment of a relationship, and therefore it had to be intimate. And therefore what he writes all the time is that each community has to be faithful to its own intimate vision, and it cannot share it with others. This is the idea that Chazal emphasize when they say it's also to teach Torah to a goy. What do they mean? And they say, why? Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kirat Yaakov. Because Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu. Morasha, the Moshe means a legacy, inheritance. Kirat Yaakov. But the Gemara takes it even much further. Gemara says, Al tikri morasha ela meurasa. Don't read it as a legacy, but as you betroth. You're engaged to, you're married to Torah's married to Am Yisrael. Meaning the intimacy of marriage applies. Now, let me give an example. You can teach a goy the value system. You can give the information. What Torah tells you, that information you can give to a goy. Because it's a value system, and we want our values, as was mentioned in the previous question, the values we also want everyone to enjoy and benefit from. However, you can't have a chavrusa with a goy. You can't say Daf Gemara, because that's an act of being intimate. That's an act of Am Yisrael interacting, expressing a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now, that was his basic theory, and that I remain identified with. I remain committed to. You will never catch me endorsing or going to an interfaith prayer or anything of that like. However, I do think that we can ally ourselves and align ourselves spiritually in certain issues. I'll tell a story. Okay, since there's no one listening, I'll tell this intimate story. When the Pope came to Israel, it's like 12, 13 years ago, I think. something like it was about 12, 13 years ago, if I remember. So Beit HaNassi reached out to my father and requested the Pope was going to meet the president, and they wanted some guidance, some advice from a rabbinic figure how to interact and how to relate. At the time, my father he asked me that I should write the document. He then reviewed it, and in essence, what I read was the following: that in the Middle Ages, in the Age of Faith, everyone agreed that you should be a believer. Everyone accepted a transcendental being outside the world, a creator. So what did theological interfaith dialogue come down to? It came down to my version versus your version. And obviously, Jews and Christians were at loggerheads constantly because our version and your version contradict each other totally. That still remains true, but now with that is the second stage. If you have a building, it's not the first floor, it's the second floor. The first floor now is men of faith as opposed to secular people. It's now basically anyone who believes in a divine transcendental being as opposed to those who deny any divinity, any transcendental being in the world. So now in a sense, before we go and move on and discuss the differences, what do we believe in, what do you believe in, I think we have a common goal. We should have an alliance regarding faith, spirituality in the world. I have a friend he's a Rav in some community in Chutz La'aretz. Across the street from him is a church, and he's in friendly terms with the local priest over there. So one day, he's a Catholic if I remember. So one day there was a conference of Catholic educators from the whole country that he lives in. And okay, so then a week later he bumped into him. He asked him, well, what are you guys talking about? Internet, technology, hedonism, materialism, nothing that you couldn't have. You couldn't have a conference of Jewish educators with the exact same deliberations. And that's what I'm saying. I think we have at the moment, and what I wrote in that document was, we will not paper over the differences of stage B. But stage B, I think that now in the contemporary world, we should emphasize the common values of spirituality and faith, and we should, our men of faith should now come and proclaim that message, as opposed to a secular, relativistic society. That Hashem, so now that doesn't therefore endorse interfaith prayer, interfaith worship, but it does mean that I think you can have, we do have what to talk to them about, how you view the world at large and the challenges of technology and so on. Politically, I really believe that it is danger. You know, it's I agree with everything that Dayan Zobin said before about choosing your partners, and I would certainly be wary of those chevra, all the evangelicals and the like. I think we should be very careful using them.
Do you want to say?
Yeah, maybe just to, I don't know if you plan to ask me a different question. Or
I will. Yeah.
Okay. I just, very briefly, just, I suppose from the ground, we too have a church just opposite on the corner, and just Thursday morning, my wife and I were sitting with the Vicar of Hendon. I just want to make 2 points, and they are, in a sense, the same as the points that Rav Lichtenstein has made, and just from an Anglo perspective. The first is, I think that we're almost not anymore dealing with interfaith. We're dealing with, I don't even know the word, intercultural or intercommunal. Unfortunately, for better or for worse, at the moment, that the issues facing UK society and probably international society are so much more profound and basic than we are. My wife and I sat with the Archbishop of Canterbury a few weeks before this. Myself, I'm meeting senior Muslim clerics and Christian clerics, unfortunately, regularly at the moment. And this is so far from what I ever thought I would do in my rabbinic career. I was so profoundly disinterested in interfaith until the last few years. We're not dealing with interfaith. There's so little theology that's being spoken about. We're dealing with survival. We're certainly dealing from a narrow parochial perspective with Jewish survival and trying to engage in basic bridge building of finding a shared sense of humanity. And many of the clerics are profoundly troubled, as are we, by some of the developments. And I don't think the word is any more interfaith in these sorts of discussion. It's intercommunal, intercultural, interdenominational, I don't know what words one uses, but it's basically just an attempt to develop some degree of shared empathy and basic human sympathy and human understanding when there's such a divide in how we are viewing the world. So that's the first point I want to make, and I can't speak for Rav Lichtenstein's grandfather, for the great Rav Zecher. I can't say I don't believe anything we're doing he would have had any objection to, because it is so far from anything profound, unfortunately. It's so basic ability to talk a common language. The second thing I will say is, and this again, this echoes Rav Lichtenstein's point, we are, at least here in the UK, and maybe 10 years ago, as I said, the USA wasn't following this path, but it so clearly is. The degree to which nihilism, materialism, extreme doubt about any objective truths, any transcendent values, the degree to which there's been a breakdown in community. One's heart wants to cry when one looks at the citizens of the UK with so little sense of community, even on a basic level, just the friendship circles and the sense of shared spiritual destiny and shared values. And the degree to which our teenagers, in many cases, Christian teenagers and Muslim teenagers, have been captured by this negative, materialistic, nihilistic philosophy, which is soul-destroying and denies any aspect of the human spirit, is so profoundly challenging that I think anything we can do to try and restore some sense of shared spirituality here in the UK and increasingly across the Western world is absolutely essential. On a personal level, I would say, I think all of us need to start getting used to using spiritual vocabulary in our conversations with our colleagues and our friends. When someone asks us how we're doing, say thank God. Let's like the Takana of Boyas and the Gemara mentions, we need to reintroduce a sense of value and transcendence in each of us in our own little way. There's not much we can do about the bigger picture most of the time. And in that sense, again, Lichtenstein doesn't need my agreement, but I think we are on stage A, we're not on stage B, and laying that foundation of faith back into our international community and national community is so essential.
So thank you. I'm going to throw open to the floor if you want to ask any questions up till now. Otherwise, I have plenty of other questions. So, yes. Donald.
Following on what Rav Mosheh said about addressing global issues from a Jewish perspective and responding to the initiatives of other faiths, can you envisage a mechanism by which there might be a Jewish response to Laudate Se or other encyclicals?
Jewish response to what?
Laudate Se, the encyclical that Pope Francis gave about climate change. Or there's another encyclical which has just come out about AI.
Yes.
Can the Jewish community, is there a mechanism by which the rabbinic leadership of the world can respond?
Right. The current Pope has been quite busy coming out with statements, particularly about climate change and AI. And they obviously have a structure which enables him to generate statements on behalf of the Catholic Church. Do we have, or should we have, a structure which will enable us to respond on behalf of Judaism? We're off.
Well, I say like this. Should the issues concern us? I think absolutely. Should we address the issues? Yes. Do we have a mechanism? We don't have a pope, right? Everything is two rabbanim, 4 opinions, and there's no, even Motzei Gedolat Torah, there are now 3 Motzei Gedolat Torah, so you don't, there's no central mechanism. Obviously, it's very different than the Catholic Church. Should we have such a mechanism? I don't know that I want to have a pope that everyone is obligated to. I certainly think the issues should concern us, and we should be dealing with them. It's on one level, I would think it'd be easier to respond when we have more experience. But you could of course claim we should respond first in order to channel the technology to a certain way, and not to wait till it's already an established fact and then it's too late. On the other hand, I do think that once we're more familiar, have a better handle on it, we'll understand much better what also are the issues. But yes, I would definitely say we should address these issues. It will take more time. I think Rabbanim have to absorb it more, also there's something else which is maybe unfortunate, but it's one of the, I think it's one of the consequences of, at least regarding Israel, and I think it's true about Rabbanim in the world at large, because we're dealing with issues of survival. I mean, at the moment, last night, after Shabbos was over here at a very early hour, I stayed at Motzei Shabbos dealing with ethical and moral issues in Israel, which are burning issues. Unfortunately, due to the state of war, due to all the issues of the violence, there's sometimes the urgent pushes aside the important. And there's certain urgency to dealing with the moral and ethical issues of war, of morality in war, and of coping with anti-Semitism, and all these issues, both here and communities across the globe, and certainly back home. These issues, they do tend to force you to postpone. I think it's one, obviously. I think we should address them, and we will. But I do feel comfortable addressing the issue of technology, not AI. I think AI is too new, and I'm not cutting edge, and I do feel that you have to absorb more and understand it better before we jump to conclusions. I do feel we can talk about the past 20 years, and I think we do address it occasionally. But once more, I think, just descriptively, the urgency of some of the other issues that constantly force you to deal with. And I don't apologize for that, because I really think, yes, at the end of the day, the Pope is sitting in the Vatican and he hasn't had a war in 500 years. So he has the luxury of, rooting for the Chicago White Sox and dealing with AI. But unfortunately, we have pressing matters.
On the matter of the lack of central authority in the Jewish community, I always think about a statement of your father, where he said that our Johnsons have no Boswells. To have authority, you need to have a boss, and you need to have Nochschleppers. Jews are no good at being Nochschleppers. We all think we're bosses, so we don't have the literature of a Johnson who relied on Boswell to write it all up. And similarly, in our communal structures, we don't have people who are clearly in charge, who can rely on a phalanx of infantrymen to look after them. Let me ask you, we were discussing before the more ugly people out there who are using our predicament to further unpleasant ends. But isn't it the case that we've actually already imported those ideas into the Jewish community to a degree? I very often, if I talk about projects or working with Muslims or with Arabs, people within the community will say to me, "Oh, you don't know how the Arab thinks." Well, and there is no such thing as the Arab thinks, and that's almost pretty close, or let's call it's racism. Do you detect such racism come into the community, and if so, is it wrong?
So maybe let me answer the question in reverse. Is Judaism racist? as a matter of principle, are we a racist faith? I think the answer is no. Chazal perhaps made the most powerful statement against racism anywhere in the ancient world. There's a famous Mishnah, Lama Adam Nivra Yechidi, why were humans all descended from one ancestor? And one answer the Mishnah gives is, whoever saves one soul is as if they saved one world, the whole world. Interesting two texts in the Mishnah, one who saves a Jewish soul or saves any soul. But then the Mishnah says a second answer to the question, in which the Mishnah says that it's so that no human can turn to another human and say, my ancestor is greater than yours. So I think we have the heart of the most profound statement against claim of sort of racial superiority by one person over another. They're stated in the Mishnah that no human should be able to turn to another human and say, ultimately my ancestor is greater than yours. We all descend from one ancestor. All humans are created in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Psukim in Bereshis. The Mishnah of us. Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem, precious are human beings that created in the image of God. We have an additional love that we know this. And then the Mishnah talks about Chaviv and Yisrael. What are the unique responsibilities and love bestowed upon the Jewish people? We mentioned earlier Kol Bayonon, that we aspire to a world in which any human being can draw near to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have a pasuk, V'hafta l'reach ha'kamocha. It's machlokes achronim what nereacha means. I will cite simply Rav Shimshon and Rav who says it refers to all human beings. He links it to the Mishnah in Avos. Ahoves habrios, love all creatures. Brios doesn't say Ahov Yisrael, love all Jews, love all brios. So we have enough within Judaism, within halachah, that indicates to us that we are meant to go navigate our way through life with a fundamental sense of shared common purpose and brotherhood, sisterhood, siblinghood with all human beings. Having said that, we clearly also ascribe to a value system, and Re'acha also has limitations. Re'acha b'chal mitzvahs, etc. Re'im mitzvahs. It is clear that there are differences in values between our faith and some of the other faiths. And certainly when Chazal were talking in the context of the pagan world, they were very alert and aware of this difference. And there are as a result, halachic divides in norms of behavior and expectations associated with how we interact with others. So on one leg, I'm trying to say on a sort of abstract level, before we come to the specifics of your question, that something that really deserves a lengthy exploration and lengthy share, that we have a fundamental set of values that calls upon us to recognize the shared humanity of everyone, on the one hand, and on the other hand, a set of values that also reminds us that we have a sense of mission, and not everyone ascribes to these values, and there are societies and cultures which we need to be able to call out and recognize that they carry within them profoundly problematic elements. So this is, I suppose, the theoretical context. On a pragmatic level, I want to say a number of things. Is there racism within our community? Of course. We are a large collection of human beings, and within our community, like with any other large gathering of humans, you're going to find people who are racist, people who aren't racist, and the like. Does it ever make sense to talk about a collective, the Arab mindset or something of the sort? No, it doesn't. These are superficial categories that aren't accurate, and they're not even helpful, because if you're inaccurate in your understanding of the reality of the world, the mitzvahs of the world, then you're not going to be able to interact with it in a reasonable sense. Does that mean that we need to swing to the opposite extreme of a sort of a fantastical political correctness, in which we're not able to identify and accept that there are very profound problems within certain warped distortions of faith, and that we need to be able to call out extremism and not use misuse claims of Islamophobia and the like, not to be able to challenge certain profoundly problematic developments within parts of our world and the Muslim world and the Christian world? Absolutely, we have to be able to call it out, and we have to be able to recognize extremism within our own communities and extremism within other faith communities, and accept that they present profound challenges to Israel's survival on a state level, and to the ability of Jews to flourish, to continue to flourish in the diaspora on a more narrow level. So I think we need to be careful and alert to generalizations on the one hand, and then be able to correctly identify that there are trends which are alarming, and these need to are sometimes linked back to distortions of faith systems and misuse of other faiths' so-called sacred texts, and we need to be concerned around that. I would say, though, that in my view, the role of terrorism is never in the direct damage that it does. The role of terrorism is always in the terror that it creates. This is, God forbid, not to belittle any single life that is lost. Every single life that is lost is a tragedy. But the reality is that in a secure Western democracy, whether it's Israel or the UK, the actual physical harm that can be done by terrorists, the number of lives lost, is limited in the sense that it's unfortunately and tragically doesn't supersede, is not larger than the number of lives that are lost in car crashes and the like. The role of terror is to create terror, and the role of terror is to divide societies and to push us into that sort of groupthink, and is to push the moderates to the edges, and to increase a narrative of fear and a narrative of generalizations. And to slip into that is to grant victory to the terrorists. And there's no doubt that in many respects, the events of the last few years have been successful from their distorted, warped aims. And we as a community have been pushed into extremes. It's not for me to talk about what's going on in Israel in a significant way, but as an outside observer, it seems to me there are aspects of the trends within Israeli society that are worrying, connected to that. And that is to grant victory to the extremists. The extremists want moderates on both sides to despair. They want both sides to become extreme, so that you end up with an ever-increasing vicious circle of ever-widening gulf between communities to make impossible the concept of living together in peace and harmony. And if we allow that to make inroads in our own community, then we will have granted them victory.
Thank you.
I'll allow myself to say, I do believe in certain parts of society, I do believe there is a certain amount of racism. I don't think it's because we're having the past few years. I think it's ingrained. The more you have an influence, it's like this, the more your perspective is that my Yahadus, my Yiddishkeit, is open to the world. You recognize that this Chochmah B'Goyim. The more you're open towards the general society, I think the less you are prone to this trap, because you respect, and you think that Johnson and Boswell are great figures, so you also, it means it's what to learn from Goyim. Goyim has spiritual life, but if you're very insular and you don't believe that general culture has anything to offer you at all, so your interaction only is utilitarian and functional. And if you go back in the historical experience, it's usually been, let's run away from the guy down the street because who knows what he'll do to us. If you're growing up 100 years ago, the Rav once said in a drasha, how come they killed the Egyptian firstborn? The Bukhar Hashvi, the Egyptian in the slum, he wasn't calling the shots for Paro. Because he said, when I was a child, a 6-year-old in White Russia, I wasn't trying to escape from the Tsar. I was escaping from the local anti-Semite across the street. And when you're in a society in which you don't interact with you don't benefit from society. Society is only threatening because they have nothing to offer, because we have all Torah, and outside Torah there's nothing to look for. So I think it does... even subconsciously, it does create a mindset which some people will not, fall into that. But I do think it creates a certain atmosphere in which it may be easier to do that. And of course, certain mystical. The more mystical you are, it's easy to take this to many different directions. And also, Israel has a unique set of issues. I don't think we should discuss that here, because Israel, the problem of racism ties in. On the one hand, it has to do with influence of Cook and philosophy, but on the other hand, it has to do with a society which is threatened, a society which is fighting for its survival. It doesn't justify anything, but it means it's a whole different discussion, a whole different set of circumstances, which will take us far adrift already.
So I'm going to ask, yes, would like to ask a question.
One of the biggest...
Could I ask you to shout? Because
one of the
we're a
biggest
long way
worries
away.
I have is the hatred in our universities and schools directed against us, and also in the Muslim madrasas where they're teaching to hate Jews as well. And that bodes very badly for the future, because if this generation of students grow up in 20 years' time with this hatred, they'll be the leaders of this country and other countries, America, etc. And that, to me, is the biggest threat, because it's not just what's today, but 10, 20, 30 years' time.
I recognise the fear, and what is going on in campuses is profoundly alarming. What I would say is, and I know this is not a popular message, but I want to say it nonetheless, what's happening is very, very complicated, and I wish there was a simple way to summarise the situation. And I find myself struggling with, on the one hand, wanting to validate and recognise the genuine problems within our society and the genuine challenges on campus, and on the other hand, to also draw attention to the complexity of the situation, the nuance that needs to be found. And this narrative that we live now in the UK in an anti-Semitic society is simply not factually correct in my view. There are trends which are alarming and problematic. We also live in among one of the safest parts of the world on a statistical level, and I don't mean by this any big theological point or any decision about where people should choose to live or not live, but on a statistical level we are safer here than almost any other time in history and almost anywhere else in the world. One is far less likely to be injured or hurt as a Jew here in the UK than sadly in the USA and in Israel. And we need to address genuinely some concerns about the trends that are happening, and at the same time keep a certain cool, calm analysis of the situation within which we find ourselves. That's the first point around the alarmist narrative, which is there and worrying, but also needs to be seen in context and proportion. The second point I want to make is that to label this simply as a Muslim phenomena is in my view only part of the picture, and it's more complicated than that. I think all of us know in this room that there is a bizarre alliance between the Muslim world and the far left, and I think the picture is complicated by a philosophy that has swept across our campuses and the youth, and you're correct, is growing upwards now around the denial of objective truth and an anti-colonial sentiment and a loathing of the West and the liberal traditions of the West, which have granted these privileged youth their very ability to speak in that way. And if we don't address the root causes, we sometimes miss the point. And ironically, in that area, sometimes Muslim faith leaders are our best allies, because Muslim faith leaders, in that sense, are fellow travellers of transcendence and spirituality. The third element I want to throw in the mix, and I'm really summarising very, very complicated, in my view, very complicated matters in brief, is I don't think we remotely understand the complexity of the Muslim world and the degree to which it is itself split into factions and wings and groups. We kind of know, the Shia and the Sunni, and then sort of throw around a couple of labels. The Muslim world is enormously complicated. If we think our communities are fragmented, Rav Lichtenstein was speaking about the fact that we don't have a central body, we don't have a pope, we don't have their communities are far more fragmented. The nature of interaction between their senior leadership and their youth is very complicated. The idea that the madrasas and the mosques here in the UK are teaching extremism has a truth to it, but not the whole truth. And I think part of what our community needs to start investing in is we need to turn our Jewish ingenuity, our entrepreneurial spirit, our problem-solving mindset to a forward-looking, proper analysis of and depth of understanding of what's really going on, and what we can do to contribute to a positive move move forward. I do not think that we can be simplistic and just see this as an inevitable trajectory of a rise of the Muslim population and therefore inevitable doom and gloom. I don't want to be simplistic about the golden age of Islam and say, well, once upon a time we got each other. All these things are complicated, but the idea that there is I dispute the idea that there's an inevitable trajectory driven by the demographics of where the West is going and where the Muslim community is going. It's a possibility, certainly, and one won't be naive not to recognise that, but there are other trajectories that one can imagine, and that we need to start thinking about how what we can do in that way. And therefore, I would say it is correct. We need to support our students. We need to be alarmed about what's going on. We need to fight it. But if we think that every call to free Palestine is driven by anti-Semitism, if we think that every objectionable comment, the only response is calling out anti-Semitism, if we don't start talking and listening, then we are doomed. And we have to start doing that, and we have to learn how to do that better as a community.
Thank you. My wife's terrified that I'm going to tell stories of life across the road in Hendon School with 700 Muslim students. She's preparing the dessert to throw at me should I actually recount any of those stories, so I won't. I want to talk to you about Israel, I'm afraid, and shockingly, the great schism in Israeli society today, or at least one of the great schisms, is between religious Jews and religious Jews. And that was certainly something that 30 years ago we weren't expecting. And now we find demonstrators outside your door. We find we've travelled quite a distance in order to demonstrate outside your neighbour's door, I think. But
They blocked off the road today.
right. How are we going to apply Jewish values to try and bring those sides together? Maybe the question is, who has the right to learn and who should be going to the army? Maybe we need to answer that directly. But even if we could try and sketch out, how are we going to bring those two sides together?
I can sketch out. The problem is, give me a napkin, I'll sketch it out. But no one's going. No one's going to listen. All these moderate voices have been heard, and the problem always is that the center doesn't hold. The extremists, and the problem is, politically, both extremes benefit from fighting with each other. Those on both sides, it will help them in the coming elections or help them throughout the year. So they have very little incentive to compromise. Or to put it differently, my father always used to say, why don't people like to compromise? Because the price you pay up front and the benefits you reap way down the road. So there's very little incentive. People are always afraid, I'll compromise now. And who knows, will I ever get the benefit? Will I ever forgive myself for compromising and never benefiting later on? I was approached, that's why I was approached by someone a few months ago. He was asked to sign, and he was an appropriate person for various personal reasons. He was asked to sign on a petition demanding the Haredim all go into the army. He wanted to know, would my father have recommended he sign? I said, listen, I can't speak for my father. He's, I can't claim to speak for someone who I don't know. Okay, so what do I think? He was stuck with me. So I said, listen, optimally, his question was to sign or not to sign. So optimally, you should be signing a different letter. You should be signing a letter in which the Haredi community understands the needs. They recognize the sacrifice of the rest of the community. They empathize both with the loss, with the tragic losses. They understand the need to relieve people of the burden, unspeakable burden that they are carrying on their shoulders now. They are acutely aware of the need for some change. Nevertheless, they don't feel that the moment they can, on a dime, turn around their battleship, but they enter into a process, first they recognize it, and they enter into a process in which they want to think constructively about a solution. And the other side should be saying that on the one hand, we need you, and we need your contribution, and we need you to participate, but we don't, we recognize that society isn't transformed overnight. And let's be fair. If the rest of Israeli society, that every kid in Israel knows, and every mother knows, from the age of 2, that 16 years later he's going to be drafted into the army. So you grow up, you get accustomed to the idea, you grow up. I'm pretty convinced that if in general society, both religious and secular, there weren't 90-95% people going to the army, but say 10, 15, many others wouldn't go in. Not everyone goes in because of conviction. A lot of people go in because this is the way society is. This is the way, this is part of the obligations to society. And the Haredi don't have that. So many people who really should be going in don't go in because my neighbors aren't going in. There's not a culture or mindset of doing that. So I think we should recognize this theoretical letter should also say we recognize that society is not transformed overnight. Societal change is an evolving process. And but there should be a sense of cooperation. How can we? What's happening, of course, is the reverse: is that every side is staking out an extreme position. Each side is digging a deeper and deeper hole and then you get all this acrimony. You get the unwillingness to. Now, this is not divorced from what's going on. This goes back to ethics, from general dialogue in the country and the polarization, not only between frum and frum, but between different segments of society, between right and left, in a society which is polarized, and the dialogue is polarizing, and the dialogue is not listening, but it's rather shouting. And this is, of course, not only in Israel. This is part of a more general phenomenon. Look what's going on in the United States, and that's my impression on my knowledge here. Also, it's part of the change. Like civil debate is. Look at the President of the United States, quote unquote, one of the most powerful people in the world. So put aside everything, all my other issues with him. Look at the kind of dialogue, the kind of in your face, the kind of I won't listen to anybody, I will persecute my perceived opponents, I weaponize the judicial system against them, etc., etc. This spills over into Israel also. It's not, Israel's not isolated or has its windows are open to the world. And in a society in which often in the sense that you can achieve things, but so that's why I think the answer is dialogue, cooperation, understanding that each side has to move towards the middle and find some kind of accommodation. I'm willing to debate the merits of the issue, but I think if each side recognizes the needs of the other, I think some working arrangement, you can start with on a small scale, but working arrangements can be worked out. I'll just give you an example. If tomorrow morning you don't take the Haredi population en masse to Golan, but nevertheless you take them technological units, and this relieves and this frees up other people for other missions. There's there are many things which can be done, but there has to be a willingness. Now, I will say, I think beneath the surface there are cracks. I do believe part of the Haredi, the opposition, is because they recognize that there are cracks in their society. They would be much more forgiving and much less shouting if they felt that there was. But I think they do feel that cracks, and because of that, they are more alarmed. And when you're more alarmed, you tend to respond even more harshly. But this is how it should be done. Now, also, I think a point which is never made in these discussions or in the op-ed pieces, but it's essential to understanding what's going on. There is an amount of ideology involved. If you believe in Zionism, be it secular or religious Zionism believes that the historical processes are extremely significant from a religious point of view. We can debate the exact significance, and we can debate, what is this Geula or not Geula? But, basically, if you subscribe to religious Zionism, you say to yourself that you are part of a historical endeavor which is religiously significant. Because of that, you're willing to pay greater prices. The self-sacrifice is greater because you identify and you believe it's a cause. This is not only just protect ourselves. At the end of the day, people go to the army, both secular and religious Zionists, not only for protection, but also because they want to realize an ideal and a goal. And because of that, you're willing to pay greater prices. The Haredim, at the end of the day, don't believe in this. The vast majority of them, they may have a positive opinion of the state, more or less, but they don't really buy into religious Zionism, be it Herzl, be it Zionism at all, be it Herzl, be it Rav Kook, be it Rav Alkali, they don't buy into that. And now it's never stated, but that's obviously part of the story.
Thank you. Did you want to?
It's interesting because I'll just comment briefly. I think beyond the divisions between the religious Zionist side and the Haredi side or grouping, I think, and the Rosh Yeshiva mentioned this earlier, there are divides within the religious Zionist world itself, and it seems to me that these are also conversations that struggle to take place. I think, at least speaking from a diaspora perspective, till fairly recently, most people had a kind of a view that there's modern orthodoxy in the diaspora, very, very influenced by the teachings of the Rav and others. And anyone in Israel who roughly looks similar with a kippah sruga on their head is sort of aligned theologically. And all I would say is, from our point of view in the diaspora, I think we need to understand better the flavours of religious Zionism in Israel. And Yeshiva mentioned this, that the differences between perhaps the Rav Zionism and Rav Kook Zionism, and where within Rav Kook's students, some of the divides as to how to interpret his teaching between Tzvi Yehuda and others. I think these are conversations that probably are important for us to become more part of than perhaps we have been in the UK until now. And understanding within our own modern orthodoxy and religious Zionism, there are perhaps nuances that we have to start reflecting upon with greater care if we're to both understand what's going on in Israel, if for those considering Aliyah, if we're to make Aliyah successfully and know where to fit in. And often in Chutz La'aretz we can get away with sort of fuzzy thinking around these things. I think I say to every couple that approach me about Aliyah, the degree to which research has to be done as to exactly which community one goes to, and one can't just come in with a sort of naive chutznik sense of if they kind of look like me and wear similar kippah, will fit in there. I think that's also something that we need to think about.
Right. I think it's going to be a final question, no pressure.
So, some conflict of interest at the beginning. How appropriate and what are the levels of appropriateness for us in the diaspora when we are supporting Israel? Is it appropriate for us to support an institution that opposes the draft? Should we be sending all of our children to Hesder yeshivas? You would say yes, obviously, but
children or your donations?
Should we be supporting charities? Would the IDF widows and orphans be better than when we've got limited resources? Can we exclude those people who exclude themselves from the responsibilities of going into the army?
Personally, I don't think so. I think, look, I'll say like this. I think when you, first of all, I'll just add on to the final says Rabbi Zobin from before. I think you should be aware of what's going on in Israel and these nuances in the conversation. Not only that you should have a successful aliyah, because this is what I mentioned before about being part of the community. Chad hamitzapeh lirota. What do I expect of diaspora Jews, modern Orthodox or religious Zionist Jews in Chutz La'aretz? So first, I expect them to be engaged and involved, to be aware of the dilemmas, to be aware of what's bothering us, the dialogue, the conversation. I think it's part of the same way. I have a brother who lives in New York, and I'm aware of various family issues and dilemmas that he faces. Not because I'm going to give him any advice. And I'm not going to give any advice about shidduchim or about anything else, but I think part of feeling that we're that we're two brothers, and that we each understand the other's life situation, the dilemmas the other is facing. I think this is simply part of engaging and interacting as a community, and because of that, I do think it's important. Yes, go online once a day and read the headlines of an Israeli newspaper. Go listen to sichot by various rabbanim in Israel. Be part of the dialogue. I think it's not only a privilege, and I also think it's expected. It should be done. That's what. Now I have another expectation. I don't. I'll say it like this. I try to continue my life despite all the various disruptions that there are. So we continue our lives, and we continue. I continue letting my children go to Tzomet HaGush, even though there's been some problems there occasionally. I think one person has to continue living his life. Now I don't need American rabbis or others to come on quote-unquote solidarity missions. to come when the Iranians, when they were bombed some Iran and Iraq, take a few pictures, spend 3 days at the airport, and then go back. It's meaningless. I'm a grown-up. I can manage without that. What do I expect? That you should continue your same routine in Israel. Meaning, your child is in Yeshiva for a year, and the Iranians decide to win a war. Let him stay in the Yeshiva. Don't take him back home. You plan on sending a kid for a year post high school. Don't change your plans just because of recent events or whatever. I expect you to continue the routine. Whatever was routine for people in Chutz La'aretz vis-a-vis Israel, you come every year for Sukkot, so come, even if there wasn't Intifada that year. If you don't come for Sukkot, don't come. I have no complaints. But if you plan on coming, don't not come because of that. I say in terms of personal, these at least are my expectations. Regarding. I'll add another point which you didn't ask, but I will nevertheless say, I think therefore it's also legitimate for people in Chutz La'aretz to voice opinions and to be part of the conversation and to take positions on what's going on in Israel. It's our country meaning all Jews, and all of us are stakeholders. Even I said before, those who live there, those who aspire to. I think everyone's stakeholders. I do think though, there's a difference. Like if I'll say like this, I would say, if you talk about like voting shares in a corporation, I would say for every one vote of a Ben Chutz La'aretz in Israel, you get 2 votes. Because I do think he's much more invested in this. I think he's the one who's in danger. He's the one who will pay the price of the consequences of these decisions. So I don't think because of that, I don't think you can come and say we should silence everyone living in Chutz La'aretz because they're not stakeholders. They are. But I do think that no, there has to be a certain humility that, it's like this recent engagement. I was years ago in the States, and I remember, this is 1992, 1993, when Chevron was up, I remember seeing a sign, save Chevron without getting up from your keyboard. and I was shocked, because the people in Chevron, I have many, many disagreements with them. Many things they do, I think are wrong. But nevertheless, I admire them for, they put their lives, their convictions on. They are there, and they're willing to face the consequences of their convictions. And they don't sit in Long Island and think that by hacking away the keyboard they can save the world. So I believe, yes, there is a right and a privilege to be part of the dialogue and the conversation. And that's why I think Israel also feels comfortable in requesting support. But I said before, I think it's like whatever, you can. There's a certain priority that the Israeli does have. Now, I would support. That's where you send your child to. Of course, I teach a certain institution. I believe in a certain ideology. I would obviously tell you to send to. However, if you ask me in terms of supporting, I think, even though I disagree, you mentioned demonstration. The demonstration against Justice Zobin was outside my window. We live across the street from each other. So even though these guys are protesting, 2 hours before, a bunch of people who also don't go to the army came and knocked on the door and asked for tzedakah. I gave them willingly. And if they come tomorrow morning, I won't slam the door in their face and say, no, your neighbors are protesting, I'm going to slam the door. Chas v'shalom. I'll give them again. Because I think, we're all Jews. Even if I think that they're misbehaving, even if I disagree with them, we're all one extended family. And we have a common responsibility. And I certainly believe that helping someone who's struggling with the basic necessities of life is more important than going and buying ala esh for chayalim. The chayalim may be really endangering themselves, and the chayalim are doing the right thing. But nevertheless, if I ask myself to buy middle class chayalim some added delicacies, or to give to someone who really can't put food on his table, I think we should. I really believe that tzedakah should. We should look at every Jew and every human being, and certainly every Jew, and we should try to. The Rav used to give. Maybe now I can. He never publicized this, but I guess you can say this now already. The Rav, they used to come from Eida Charedis to ask the Rav for money. The Rav would give them money. So one day someone asked the Rebbe, you disagree with them. They're opposed to everything that you he said. I made a tonight with them. The money goes to chinuch, not to politics. So how much they lived up to that, who knows? But I think you should continue supporting them. But like all tzedakah, you have to prioritize. I know people who stop giving. I know Israelis. I spoke to an Israeli who's a big Baal tzedakah. He gives a lot of money to tzedakah. He told me, I can't do it. That's an emotional decision. And I don't know if I can criticize a person who this is an emotional decision for him. But if you ask me, I think we should continue giving.
Sadly, I hear the tinkling of dessert spoons, so I'd like you to join with me and thank our panelists for their time and particularly their wisdom. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Rabbi Pollack, for moderating this evening and for being one of the committee on the